I wanted you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the exact sound of a hebi, 10yen koppa, coin dropping into the metal berry over added rotary phone. Or partsas recalled the earthy, comforting scent of a dark green mosquito coil burning slowly on a humid summer night. These are not just memories. They are the lost fragments of a deeply beautiful time. Today, we are going to explore 24 Gatten everyday rituals from 1980s and 1970s Japan that we have lost forever. We will wander through the narrow streets of the Showa era, feeling the warm nafolif rived a more human pace. And I urge you to steep with me until the very end, as we will recall a seemingly invisible glass object that silently witnessed every single family dinner of our youth. A small detail that might just bring a tear of nostalgia to your eye. Before we step back into these vibrant streets, let us pause and remember how our itself used to feel. Back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the world simply moved at a much slower, gentler pace. We did not rush through our days, constantly staring at glowing rectangles in our hands. Time was not something to be aggressively managed or optimized. It was something we patiently lived through. There is a common myth today that because we lacked modern digital technology, our lives were somehow poorer or less connected. But you and I know the exact opposite is true. Our lives were infinitely richer in genuine human connection. Waiting was not an inconvenience. It was an essential part of the social fabric. We waited for the tofu vendor to arrive. We waited for the train station public phone to become available. And we waited weeks for a handwritten letter to arrive in the mail. That anticipation made the rewards so much sweeter. We relied heavily on our neighbors, and in return, they relied on us. We looked people in the eye. We knew the names of the local shopkeepers, and we felt the reassuring physical presence of our community all around us. The rituals we are about to revisit were the invisible threads that wove our society together, creating a tapestry of warmth and sincerity that modern convenience can never replicate. Let us begin our journey by stepping out into the narrow neighborhood streets, just as the late afternoon sun begins to set, casting long golden shadows across the pavement. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the distinct melancholic note of the tofu vendor's brass horn echoing in the distance. It was a familiar, comforting melody that signaled the approaching evening. Back in the 1960s and 70s, buying a tofu was not a quick, silent trip to a bright Really supermarket. Instead, it was an everyday ritual that brought the community together. Mothers would hear the horn and hand their children a few small coins and a deep ceramic bowl. We would run out to the street, waiting for the vendor who pulled a wooden cart or rode a heavy bicycle equipped with deep, water-filled wooden tubs. The vendor always had a warm smile and a few kind words about the weather or our school day. He would skillfully slice the block of fresh, delicate tofu right there in the cool water, gently placing it into our waiting bowl. The water would sometimes splash onto our hands, feeling wonderfully crisp and cold. Carrying that fragile block back to the kitchen felt like an important mission. It was a daily exchange filled with trust, familiar faces, and a profound sense of neighborhood connection that modern convenience has quietly erased from our lives. Now, let us wander back to the dusty, sunny corners of a wild and step inside a traditional navy barred candy store lovely, known as the dagashiya. In the 1970s and 80s, these tiny, cluttered shops were magical sanctuaries for children, usually run by a kind, elderly woman who seems as timeless as the store itself. The moment you slide open the grass pan door, you were enveloped by the sweet, sugary scent of cheap candies, powdered juices, and dried squid. The wooden shelves were overflowing with brightly colored boxes and large glass jars filled with treasures that cost only 10 or 20 yen. We would stand there for what felt like hours, clutching our meager allowance, carefully calculating how to get the most out of our few coins. The dagashiya was our first real school of economics. But more importantly, it was our primary social hub. We played with small wooden toys, opened mysterious lottery tickets hoping to win a second piece of candy, and sat on the wooden bench outside, talking about our favorite television heroes. The store owner knew all of us by name. She scolded us when we were too loud, and listened to our childish grievances with infinite patience. Today, those tiny neighborhood stores have vanished, replaced by sterile convenience stores, taking with them a very special kind of innocent, unstructured freedom that belonged entirely to us. Let us tie our memories to the simple act of making a phone call, an experience that required patience and physical effort in the 1970s and 80s. Do you remember the icon red rotary dial, public phones, the 赤電話, that sat proudly outside tobacco shops and on train station platforms? Unlike today, where a phone sits silently in our pockets, reaching out to someone back then was a deliberate public ritual. You had to search for a phone, wait your turn in line, and hold a heavy stack of 10-yen coins in your sweaty palm. There was a unique tactile satisfaction in inserting the thick copper coin, hearing it drop with a solid clink into the metal belly of the machine, and placing your finger into the numbered holes of the heavy plastic dial. The mechanical whirring sound as the dial spun back to its starting position is a rhythm that has completely disappeared from the modern world. When the person on the other end finally answered, the connection felt incredibly precious because you knew your time was literally ticking away. You had to speak clearly, share your most important thoughts quickly, and sometimes frantically feed more coins into the slot to keep the voices connected. It made every conversation feel intentional and deeply valuable. We did not take communication for granted because every word spoken through that heavy black receiver cost us both time and physical treasure. Chink back to the heart of the traditional Japanese home before the era of modern dining rooms and individual screens. The undispersed center of our family universe was the chabdai, the row, round wooden tableware, everything important to Grace. In the 1960s and 70s, sitting around the chabdai on woven tatami mats was the cornerstone of daily life. This table was not just for eating meals. It was where children did their homework, where mothers folded laundry, and where fathers read the evening newspaper. Because it was low to the ground and round, there was no head of the table, creating an intimate circle where shoulders practically touched. Every evening, the entire family would gather around this modest piece of furniture to eat rice, miso soup, and grilled fish, while watching the only television set in the house. We watched the same programs, laughed at the same jokes, and shared the events of our day. When it was time to sleep, the chabudai had its legs folded and was leaned against the wall to make room for laying out the futons. This daily physical transformation of the living space created a rhythm to the day that was both disciplined and deeply comforting. The disappearance of the chabudai in favor of high tables and separate rooms subtly shifted our families from a tightly knit circle to independent individuals living under one roof. Let us close our eyes and breathe in the defining scent of a Showa-era summer. It is the unmistakable, earthy, slightly medicinal aroma of a burning mosquito coil, the katori senko. Long before we had silent, odorless electric bug repellents or modern air conditioning, fighting off summer insects was an evening ritual that engaged all our senses. Every twilight, as the humid air settled heavily over the neighborhood, a family member would carefully separate the fragile, dark green spiral incense from its twig. We would place it inside a kayaributa, the iconic ceramic holder, shaped like a puruppuri pig with a carrying handle on top. Lighting the tip with a match, we watched the tiny glowing ember take hold, followed by a thin, mesmerizing ribbon of white smoke drifting upward. That smoke would slowly fill the wooden house, weaving its way through the open sliding doors and out into the small garden. The scent was profoundly comforting. It meant that the intense heat of the day was finally breaking, and the relaxed evening hours had arrived. Falling asleep on a bamboo mat, listening to the cicadas transition into nighttime crickets, with the gentle scent of the burning coil lingering in the heavy summer air, is a memory that evokes an incredibly intense feeling of home and safety. It was a simple, beautiful defense against the summer night, lost to modern convenience. Remember the glorious, endless summer vacations of our youth in the 1970s, and the one ritual that forced us out of bed while the morning dew was still fresh. Every single day, long before the sun became unbearable hot, children all over the country gathered in local parks, shooting grounds, or schoolyards for radio taiso. The morning radio calisthenics. We would stand sleepily in rows, clutching our small attendance cards attached to a string around our necks. Exactly at 6:30 in the morning, the crackling sound of the neighborhood public address system, or a portable transistor radio, would broadcast the cheerful piano music and the energetic voice of the instructor. For 15 minutes, we would stretch our words, bend to our work knees, and breathe in the crisp morning air in perfect unison with thousands of other children across the nation. The true reward for this early rising was not the exercise itself, but the moment afterward. An adult volunteer from the neighborhood association would take out a custom ink stamp and press it onto our attendance cards. Filling that card with colorful stamps was a badge of immense pride. It gave our long summer days a sense of structure and purpose. It was a time when the entire neighborhood took collective responsibility for the health and discipline of its children. A beautiful communal bond that is rarely seen in today's fragmented society. There is a specific sound that served as the heartbeat of every traditional home in the 1960s and 70s. A sound that has now vanished into complete silence. It was the steady, reassuring ticking of the large mechanical wall clock, affectionately known as the bonbon doke. These beautiful wooden clocks, with their glass doors and swinging brass pendulums, required human interaction to stay alive. Once a week, usually on a Sunday morning, the head of the household would perform the solemn ritual of winding the clock. I can still hear the heavy, metallic clicking of the large key turning in the twin keyholes, tightening the springs that would power the hands and the chimes for another 7 days. The winding was a reminder of the passing of time, a physical effort that connected us to the present moment. And then there were the chimes. Every hour and half hour, the clock would strike with a deep, resonant bong that echoed through the quiet rooms of the house. We did not need to look at our wrists or glowing screens to know when it was time for dinner or time for bed. The house itself told us. When you lay awake in the middle of the night, the rhythmic ticking and the occasional chime were not annoyances, but comforting companions. They whispered that the house was breathing, that time was moving forward, and that all was well in our small, safe world. Let us travel back to the vibrant, echoing halls of the sento, the neighborhood public bathhouse, which was an essential part of daily life before every home had its own private bathtub. In the 1960s and 70s, grabbing your small plastic basin, a bar of soap, and a thin cotton towel to walk down the street to the bathhouse was an evening routine shared by everyone. Walking through the sliding doors, you were greeted by the friendly attendant sitting high up in the bandai, the raised wooden booth separating the men's and women's sides. The bathing room itself was a sensory masterpiece. The loud, echoing sounds of splashing water, wooden stools scraping against the tiled floor, and lively conversations filled the humid air. We scrubbed each other's backs, sharing news and gossip, while admiring the grand, colorful painting of Mount Fuji that stretched across the main wall above the deep, incredibly hot soaking tubs. Stepping into that steaming water melted away the physical exhaustion of a hard day's work. But the ritual did not end when we dried off. The absolute pinnacle of the sento experience was walking out to the changing room, dropping a coin into the vending machine, and pressing a freezing cold glass bottle of sweet coffee milk to our lips. We drank it with one hand on our hips, feeling profoundly refreshed and deeply connected to our neighbors. Think of the quiet, misty mornings before the rest of the neighborhood awoke, and the subtle, rhythmic sounds that announced the start of a new day in the 1970s. One of the most cherished of these was the soft clinking of thick glass bottles as the milk delivery man made his rounds on a heavily loaded bicycle. Almost every house had a small, brightly painted wooden box attached to the wall near the front door, proudly bearing the logo of Morinaga or Meiji. Inside this humble wooden container lay the morning's treasure. When we opened the front door to retrieve the milk, the crisp morning air would rush in. The glass bottles were covered with condensation in the summer and felt icy cold in the winter. They were sealed with a thick paper lid and covered by a thin square of protective plastic tied with a string. We used a special little metal pick with a sharp needle in the center to pop the paper lid open. The milk back then tasted different, richer and creamier, perhaps because it was delivered fresh to our doors every single day. Rinsing the empty glass bottles and placing them back into the wooden box for the delivery man to collect the next morning was a cycle of trust and reliability. It was a beautiful, sustainable ritual of everyday life that connected our families to the local dairy farmers without us ever having to leave the comfort of our homes. Before the era of disposable plastic bags and cheap nylon backpacks, there was a quiet, elegant ritual to carrying our belongings, an art form that lived in the folds of a simple square cloth. I am speaking, of course, about the furoshiki. In the 1960s and 70s, a beautiful piece of fabric was all anyone needed to transport almost anything. Mothers would expertly wrap their husbands' bento boxes in a small cotton furoshiki, tying a perfect knot at the top that served as a handle. When visiting relatives or attending a formal gathering, gifts were presented wrapped in luxurious silk furoshiki, adorned with seasonal patterns of cherry blossoms or autumn leaves. Watching someone wrap a parcel was like watching a magic trick. With a few swift folds and graceful tucks, a flat piece of cloth transformed into a secure, perfectly balanced carrying bag. The beauty of the furoshiki lay in its versatility and its respect for the objects it held. Once the gift was delivered or the lunch was eaten, the cloth was simply untied, folded into a neat, tiny square, and tucked away in a pocket. It was never thrown away. It was washed, ironed, and used again for years, often passed down from mother to daughter. This simple cloth represented a time when we valued elegance over convenience, and when we understood that the way something was presented was just as important as the object itself. Let us remember the intense, creative energy that filled our homes in the final weeks of December, a time dedicated entirely to the beautiful tradition of the Nengajo, the New Year's greeting cards. In the late 1970s and 80s, sending these cards was not a matter of typing a quick digital message. It was a massive, heartfelt project that engaged the entire family. Before the convenience of home computer printers, we relied on a marvelous, revolutionary little machine called a print goko. Bringing that brightly colored plastic box out of the closet signaled the true beginning of the holiday preparations. We spent hours drawing our own designs, carefully placing the master sheet, and pressing down the heavy flashbulbs that illuminated the room with a sudden, blinding burst of brilliant white light. Then came the incredibly satisfying process of pressing the ink through the newly burned screen onto the blank postcards. Our hands would be stained with sticky red, black, and gold ink for days. We wrote personalized messages on dozens, sometimes hundreds of cards, making sure they was bundled and dropped into the special red postal box before the deadline. The ward came on the morning of January 1st, when the postman delivered Essek, heavy stack of cards from friends, relatives, and caregars. Reading Ho's handwritten wishes while eating festive foods remains one of the most memories of our generation. In the freezing, dark nights of a Showa-era winter, there was a sound that pierced the icy silence and brought a deep sense of communal safety to our sleeping neighborhoods. Do you remember the rhythmic, sharp clack-clack of the heavy wooden sticks, the hyoshigi? This was the sound of the local night watch, a group of neighborhood volunteers bundled up in thick coats, patrolling the dark streets to warn everyone about the dangers of fire. As they slowly walked their route, they would strike the wooden sticks together, the sound echoing off the frozen walls of the houses. After the sharp clack, a strong, booming voice would call out into the night. They warned us to watch out for fire, reminding us that a single match is the cause of a great disaster. When we heard that sound approaching from down the street, we did not feel disturbed. We felt an overwhelming sense of security. We would snuggle deeper under our heavy futons, knowing that the adults in our community were out there in the freezing cold, actively watching over us. It prompted our parents to get up and do one final check of the gas valves and the kerosene heaters before finally going to sleep. This incredibly localized, human-powered alarm system was a beautiful expression of neighborhood solidarity. It reminded us every single winter night that we were not just living in isolated houses, but that we were part of a caring, interconnected community. Let us take a nostalgic journey on the trains of our youth, specifically the breathtaking marvel of the early Shinkansen in the 1970s and 80s. Traveling by bullet train was a grand, luxurious event, and the absolute highlight of the journey was visiting the dining car. Walking through the rocking train to reach the specialized restaurant carriage felt like an adventure. We would sit at proper tables with white tablecloths, watching the countryside blur past the large windows at impossible speeds, while being served hot curry rice or a perfectly cooked hamburger steak on ceramic plates. For shorter journeys, or if the dining car was full, there was the equally thrilling ritual of the ekiben, the station bento. Before the train doors closed at a platform, vendors would walk alongside the train windows, carrying heavy wooden trays slung around their necks, shouting their wares. You had to frantically lean out the window, hand over your crumpled yen notes, and grab the beautifully wrapped wooden box, just as the whistle blew and the train began to pull away. Opening that ekiben at your seat, discovering local specialties like grilled eel, delicate bamboo shoots, or pressed sushi made the journey itself the destination. Eating on a train was an anticipated celebration, a stark contrast to today's rushed, solitary consumption of convenience store sandwiches while staring down at a glowing screen. If we reach a little further back, to the 1960s and the early 70s, we can find the fading echoes of a truly magical form of street entertainment that captivated every child. I am talking about the kanishibai, the traveling paper theater. Long before television dominated our 2 afternoons, the arrival of the kanishibai man was the most exciting event of the day. He would ride his heavy bicycle into the local park or an empty dirt lot, beating a pair of wooden clappers to announce his arrival. Children would come running from every direction, scratching the E5R10 coins to get the best spot in front of the wooden stage mounted on the back of his bike. You had to buy a sweet treat from him, usually a piece of sticky taffy on a stick or some colorful hard candies. Once everyone was settled, he would open the wooden doors of his miniature theater and begin. He pulled large, beautifully painted cardboard illustrations from the frame, one by one, changing his voice to play brave heroes, evil villains, and crying maidens. We were absolutely mesmerized by his storytelling, completely transported to worlds of samurai, ghosts, and heroic orphans. He always stopped the story at a dramatic cliffhanger, ensuring we would be waiting for him the next time he visited. The Kamishibai man was our cinema, our theater, and our candy store, all rolled into one beautiful, disappearing profession. Let us recall the intense, vibrating energy of the local summer festivals, organized entirely by the sweat and dedication of the Chonai-kai, the neighborhood associations. In the 1970s and 80s, these festivals was not commercial event produced by large corporation. They was intimate, chaotic celebrations made by the neighbors, for the neighbors. For weeks in advance, the men of the community would spend their evenings storing up hundreds of paper lanterns across the streets and building, the tall wooden stage in the center of the local park. When the festival weekend finally arrived, the air was thick with the smell of grilling yakitori, sweet cotton candy, and the explosive pop of cheap firecrackers. The highlight was always the carrying of the mikoshi, the portable shrine. The adults, dressed in matching festival coats, would shoulder the incredibly heavy wooden structure, chanting rhythmically as sweat poured down their faces, bouncing the shrine to amuse the local deities. We children had our own smaller shrines to carry, feeling incredibly proud and grown up as we paraded through our familiar streets. In the evening, everyone, from toddlers to grandparents, would gather around the wooden stage to dance the bon odori in a massive, joyful circle. These local festivals forged deep, unbreakable bonds among neighbors, creating a shared history and a profound sense of belonging that defined our youth. Think back to the solitary, quiet hours of midnight, when you were a teenager in the 1970s or 80s, desperately trying to study for difficult high school entrance exams. In those lonely hours, when the rest of the house was entirely dark and silent, our greatest companion was the glowing dial of a small transistor radio. Listening to the late-night radio broadcasts was a secret, intimate ritual shared by an entire generation of students. We would plug a single, uncomfortable plastic earphone into our ear, keeping the volume turned down low so our parents would not hear. The radio personalities, the DJs, felt like our closest, most understanding friends. They read postcards sent in by listeners who were struggling with the exact same anxieties, heartbreaks, and academic pressures that we were facing. They played the newest folk and pop songs, introducing us to music that felt like a rebellion against the adult world. When the DJ read a letter that echoed our own silent thoughts, the isolation of the dark bedroom instantly vanished. We realized that thousands of other teenagers across the country were awake at that very moment, staring at their textbooks, listening to the same voice. That tiny crackling transistor radio was our lifeline, providing a powerful, invisible network of empathy and emotional support that guided us through the turbulent years of our youth. Let us bring to mind the heavy, comforting presence of the local rice shop, the komiya, a cornerstone of daily life before the era of giant, impersonal supermarkets. In the 1960s and 70s, rice was not something you casually tossed into a plastic shopping cart. It was the sacred foundation of our diet, and acquiring it was a serious, respectable transaction. Our mothers would call the local rice shop or visit in person to place an order for 10 or 20 kilograms. A day later, the delivery man from the shop would arrive at our back door, often riding a sturdy bicycle or driving a small, loud, three-wheeled truck. He would haul the massive, heavy paper bag of rice onto his shoulder with practiced ease, walking right into our kitchen to pour the gleaming white grains into the large wooden or metal rice dispenser. The smell of the raw, freshly milled rice filling the container is an aroma deeply tied to the feeling of food security. The delivery man knew our family's preferences perfectly. He knew exactly which blend we liked and would even adjust the milling process if we asked. Paying him was a friendly exchange, often accompanied by a cup of hot green tea and a brief chat about the changing seasons. It was a relationship built on absolute trust, ensuring that the most vital ingredient of our daily meals was delivered with personal care and profound respect. As the fierce winds of winter began to rattle the thin wooden frames of our Showa-era homes, survival and comfort centered entirely around one miraculous piece of furniture, the kotatsu. In the 1970s and 80s, central heating was practically unheard of. Instead, our homes were freezing cold, except for the glorious, trapped heat beneath the heavy quilt of the low wooden table. Getting into the kotatsu was a daily winter ritual. We would slide our freezing legs under the thick, patterned blanket, instantly feeling the intense, radiant warmth of the electric or charcoal heater attached to the underside of the table. Once you were in the kotatsu, it was nearly impossible to leave. The family would sit trapped together for hours, our lower halves baking in the heat while our upper bodies required thick sweaters. And no kotatsu experience was complete without a large woven basket of mikan. The sweet mandarin oranges sitting right in the center of the tabletop. We would lazily peel the bright orange skins, the sharp citrus scent cutting through the stuffy warm air of the living room. Peeling and eating mikan while watching evening television programs became a communal winter sport. The kotatsu forced families into physical proximity, creating an atmosphere of inescapable intimacy and shared comfort that fought back the bitter cold of the long dark winter nights. Let us drift back to the wildly unstructured afternoons after school in the 1960s and 70s, when our entire universe was contained within the dusty borders of an akichi, a vacant neighborhood dirt lot. Before every square meter of the city was paved and developed into parking lots or apartment buildings. These overgrown, empty spaces were the ultimate playgrounds. They often contained mysterious mounds of dirt, tall weeds, and occasionally large concrete pipes left behind by construction crews. This is where we learned the fierce, competitive art of playing beigoma, the heavy cast-iron spinning tops. We would spend hours meticulously wrapping the thin cotton string around the grooves of the metal top, preparing for battle. With a sharp, practiced flick of the wrist, we launched our tops onto a canvas cloth stretched over a bucket.
The loud, metallic clashing sound of the heavy tops striking each other, trying to knock the opponent out of the arena, was the soundtrack of our boyhood. We came home with scraped knees, dirt under our fingernails, and pockets heavy with our victorious metal treasures. There were no adults organizing our games, no safety mats, and no digital screens. We negotiated our own rules, settled our own disputes, and experienced the pure, chaotic joy of physical play in a world that allowed children the space to simply be wild and free. Finally, let us focus on a small, elegantly shaped object that stood silently on every single dining table in the 1970s and 80s, a true symbol of our shared culinary heritage. I am speaking of the iconic, teardrop-shaped Kikkoman's oyster sauce dispenser, with its vibrant red plastic cap. Before the days of country-specialized sauce and plastic squeeze bottles in the refrigerator, this elegant glass barrel was the undisputed king of the chabudai. It was a beautiful piece of industrial design that became completely invisible to us because it was so perfectly integrated into our daily lives. Pouring soy sauce from this heavy glass barrel was a delicate, practiced ritual. You had to place your index finger over the small air hole on the opposite side of the red cap to control the flow, allowing just a few dark salty drops to fall onto your grilled fish, grated radish, or cold tofu. It required mindfulness and physical control. The glass bottle was never thrown away. When it was empty, our mothers would carefully unscrew the red cap, wash the glass, and refill it from a massive, unwieldy metal can or a large plastic jug purchased from the local grocer. That gently curved glass bottle, slightly sticky to the touch, catching the dim light of the dining room bulb, represents the beautiful permanence of the Showa era. It was an object meant to last, an object we interact with every single day of our use. As we look back on these vanished pieces of our past, we come to realize a profound truth. We do not just miss the heavy red telephones, the glass milk bottles, or the ticking mechanical clocks. What we truly miss is our youth and the beautiful, patient sensation of time that belonged to that era. We miss a world where physical touch, eye contact, and the warmth of a shared community were the foundation of our everyday existence. These rituals may be lost to history, but the deep emotional bonds they created
will live in our hearts forever. If this journey brought back fond memories, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video, as it helps us keep these precious stories alive for future generations. Now, I have a question for you. Which of these vanished rituals do you miss the absolute most? Or is there another special memory from your own Showa-era childhood that you hold dear? Please share your personal stories in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I cannot wait to reminisce with you. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and your memories.